We're here with Colin Carrie, who is the MP, Conservative MP for Oshawa, and he's in Brampton. Colin, what was the reason that you're basically touring around Brampton today?
Well, I actually got invited by Ramona and Arpan to come down and work with them and listen to the community. They were saying that there's big issues in Brampton similar to Oshawa, and they just don't feel the constituents here that they're being represented as well as they could. So I wanted to come by, meet with some of the people here and see what the issues are. I think, Don, you know, in Oshawa we had some really bad news recently with the General Motors plant closing, and we have a lot in common with this community. We're both historically manufacturing communities, and we've got to start asking the hard questions why and see what we can do to make sure that we keep jobs here in Canada and make sure that workers don't pay for the Prime Minister's failures with their jobs.
Well, we have a few job closings ourselves. I know the Dixie Cup is closing. That's 300 jobs. We lost Unilever and we lost Bacardi, and I know that there's jobs in Downsview of Bombardier that are going to be losing jobs in about 6 months. So there's a lot of manufacturing jobs that are exiting this country. We used to be second in the world in auto manufacturing, as you probably well know. I think we're 11th now. We're losing a lot of jobs in manufacturing to Mexico and the United States. So is it just a global thing that you're transitioning from these manufacturing jobs to something different? Is it like from the wagon wheel to the car?
No, and I got to tell you, I'm going to take you to issue with you saying transitioning from manufacturing. That's what the Prime Minister said, but we have a long history of strong manufacturing in this province and in this country. And frankly, we can be competitive. But I've been doing a listening tour around Southern Ontario because that's one of my portfolios for economic development. And I'm hearing over and over again, manufacturers are complaining about the high cost of electricity because of bad Liberal policy. They're talking about the uncertainty with increased payroll taxes, and you know the Prime Minister wants to bring in this carbon tax that nobody knows what it's going to be, and he's not even telling us what it's going to be after the next election. So when you're making once-in-a-lifetime investments, once-in-a-generation investments, business needs certainty. And under this Liberal government, all we're seeing is failure after failure, and people are starting to pay for those failures with their jobs.
So let's take a segue back into the manufacturing. You know, in 2001, it was like 15%. We've dropped to about 8%. It's no surprise that those jobs have been leaking to other countries. In fact, I mentioned Mexico and back to the United States as well. So, you know, those situations, those dynamics, I know that a lot of people have been calling for the last 20 years to come up for the federal government to come up with a national auto strategy or a national manufacturing strategy to cover across the country. You mentioned electricity, but the federal government doesn't have anything to do with the provincial electricity rate.
That's
so
right.
If your party came into power, is that something that you'd be looking at, like a national auto strategy?
Well, we actually had an auto action plan as the Conservative government, and we looked at all the different issues that the auto manufacturers would like to see in that automotive action plan. And it was fairly successful, but if you remember, we had that horrible recession that we had to make our way through. We even worked as a government to bail out the auto sector, and it was a time when we had this worst recession since the 1930s. But the question right now, Don, is the world economy is booming. Mr. Trudeau inherited a balanced budget, but we have companies like General Motors deciding, because of the competitiveness side of it, that they can't build those cars competitively in Oshawa. And these are the questions that you brought up that we need answered. So we actually put a motion forward at the House of Commons so that we would study this closure to try to find out what we need to do to maintain these jobs in Canada and perhaps attract some new ones. And the Liberals voted that down. And that's poor representation, especially for communities like Oshawa, but here in Brampton as well.
So you brought up the idea of General Motors and helping them. I mean, a lot of people take a look at that and they take umbrage and say, I don't want to bail out a massive car again. You know, you bailed out Chrysler, you bailed out GM, Ford did it on its own. Why are we in the business of bailing out multinational corporations that make billions?
That's right, and we did it because we had to save the entire sector. And people remember we were in a horrible recession now. We're not in a recession now. These companies are making a lot of money. General Motors is going to be building those cars of the future, those autonomous cars, those electric cars. The question is, why aren't they building them in Oshawa? You brought up some really good points with electricity. That's a provincial issue. And we lost 300 to 500,000 manufacturing jobs under the Liberal government of Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne. Those jobs, once they go, it's hard to get them back. We should not be losing these jobs to Michigan, Don. And that's the big question. Why are we seeing the jobs moving towards the United States? We've seen Justin Trudeau fail. He gave in to Donald Trump with this new NAFTA deal. We see steel and aluminum tariffs still there. And just a couple of weeks ago, we found out that Mexico got an exemption for the Buy American clause. Canada didn't. So there's all these factors that are making it very difficult for manufacturers to be competitive in this country, and we shouldn't be losing those jobs.
So let's segue into the new technology that you mentioned, right? So you've got electric cars. Why isn't Canada taking a more active role in saying to those automotive manufacturers? I know that Tesla was asked if he would reinvest in something like the old GM plants. He was kind of hesitant because it's millions of dollars to transition from obviously an automotive to an electric. Why isn't the government, as I said to you before, about talking about a national energy or automotive strategy in regards to, let's see what the future has, let's go into autonomous vehicles or electric vehicles, and then be the forefront of that. Let's lead the charge in that and be able to help the industry transition to stay in Canada.
And those questions are exactly the questions that Ramona and Arpan want to ask, and they want the answers for that. Those are the questions that we want the answers for, because simply coming to these communities like Brampton, when you have a manufacturer like we saw at Dune Plastics saying it's really hard to be competitive here when the Americans are having, for example, lower electrical rates. When somebody locates on this side of the border, the uncertainty with the steel and aluminum tariffs, the Prime Minister has failed to remove those. He failed to get a good deal for us in the new NAFTA. He's failed over and over again to make policies here that allow our companies to be competitive versus the United States. And this carbon tax that he's got out, people are in uproars about that because they don't know what the costs are going to be. If you listen to the United Nations International Panel on Climate Change, they say a carbon tax to be effective may have to be as high as $5,500 per ton. Trudeau has it in at $20 per ton right now. Now, you don't have to be an economist to know that there's a big difference between $20 a ton and $5,500 a ton. So you ask why they're not investing here? Maybe we should be asking the Liberal government and the MPs in Brampton, why aren't they investing in here? And what can we do to keep those jobs here and bring more jobs here? And these are the questions my colleagues want answered.